Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. This week could be a decisive week in Venezuela. This coming Sunday, after a month of protest against President Maduro, the regime is organizing the election of an assembly that would redraft a constitution. The opposition argues that this is just a power grab by Maduro to stay in power and has called for a boycott. In the run-up to Sunday's election, the opposition is also calling for a general strike and mass protest in the streets, fueling concerns of further violence. Our guest today is one of the most vocal voices from the opposition, Maria Corina Machado. She joins us from Caracas. Thank you for being with us today. So, as I said, the opposition platform, the coalition, is calling for 2-day national strikes and then mass protests on Friday and over the weekend. Is this maybe your last hope of stopping the organization of this election, which you disagree with?
Well, it is much more than stopping this fraudulent constitutional assembly. It has to do with the transition to democracy and peace that Venezuela is fighting for. We've seen over 100 days of popular protests that have turned into a true popular rebellion in the streets. Venezuela is today suffering of violence and hunger that has been brought by this regime that is clearly today a dictatorship, but not a conventional one. This regime has turned into a true mafia state that has links with narco-traffic networks and other criminal mafia, international mafia. And Venezuelan citizens have decided to put all the pressure peacefully needed in order to make Maduro and his regime understand that it's time to step aside and facilitate a transition to, as I say, democracy and to bring back the constitutional order in our country. So it is a decisive week, and we will see in the hours to come more and more popular pressure expressed throughout our country, starting with the general strike tomorrow.
But is your objective to prevent this election from taking place this Sunday? Are you hoping that with the general strike, with mass protest, you will be able to prevent this election from taking place?
Well, it is important to be clear on what's Maduro's and his regime objective with this fraudulent process. All the institutional means that are contemplated in our Constitution have been blocked in the last years, starting with the National Assembly, which was legitimately elected in 2015, and all its powers have been stripped out by the Supreme Court, which is absolutely loyal to the dictatorship today, following with a recall referendum, which was also denied, even though all its requirements were accomplished. Now, what Maduro wants to do is violating the procedures that are stated in our own Constitution, ignore them, and with force impose a new constitution that would give him all the powers needed to stay indefinitely in power. Certainly, Venezuelan people are not going to allow this to happen, but now our struggle, and I insist on this, goes beyond stopping this process. It has to do with human dignity. It has to do with the fact that every day that goes by, tens of young kids die because of there's no food, because of the collapse of the health system, and because of violence, which is absolutely in huge levels in our country. So Maduro has answered with huge repression in these last 10 days of protests. There are over 100 Venezuelans that have been killed by his forces, civil and military. And of course, the media has been terribly silenced. Venezuelans are today and we are all conscious of what's taking place and what's in what might take place in the next hours and days. And certainly we will not stop in our decision to move ahead into, as I say, a transition to democracy, peace, and freedom.
Are you fearing that in the days to come, because of all the things we've just described, that there could be more violence? As you said, there have been some 100 people died already since the beginning of the protest. Do you fear that this could get worse if the regime doesn't change its plans?
Yes, I believe we're living the most dangerous days of this struggle. The regime has been clear in terms of letting us know that they're willing to impose at any cost this fraudulent constitution that would certainly take away the last element of the republic that we've got left. So certainly the risk is huge. Our protest, our movement is peaceful. The regime has arms and has decided to use against unarmed people. But this is a struggle, as I say, for dignity and freedom, and we will not stop. At this point, we certainly require the international community to stand firm on the side of the Venezuelan people, our constitution, and our right to define and decide our future. So the next days are decisive, as you said, but I do have trust in our will and our force to move ahead, not only to get rid of such a, as I said, dangerous and perverse regime, but most important, to rebuild democratic institutions and bring back hope and freedom to our country.
You mentioned the international community. The US President Donald Trump has hinted that if this constituent assembly, as it's known, vote goes ahead, there might be sanctions. The European Union has been more reluctant to slap sanctions on top regime figures. Do you think that this is the way to go, or do you think that this could actually do more damage because it could antagonize more the regime and lead it to react with more fury?
I believe that individual sanctions that are directed to those involved in narco traffic or violations of human rights are very effective. And in fact, that's what we're seeing right now, how individuals that had been loyal for 2 decades to this so-called revolution are breaking apart. And that's the case of the Attorney General, Luisa Ortega Diaz. When these individuals realize that a mafia state is being open and developed to the world, many of them decide to distance themselves. And these are the kinds of fractures that accelerate the fall of a dictatorship. So I certainly believe these direct sanctions have been effective, and that the United States and the European Union should take stronger steps in that direction.
You mentioned Luisa Ortega as obviously the example of former Chavistas, as they're known, breaking ranks with Nicolas Maduro. We've seen also an opposition leader, Leopoldo Lopez, who was moved from a military jail to house arrest. Do you see those phenomena as a sign of weakness, and that indeed the regime could actually fall, or at least accept what you're calling for? Because obviously, until now, President Maduro and his close allies have said they would not back down.
I certainly do. I believe that, as I say, this huge movement that has evolved in these last 100 days around Venezuela has been an enormous pressure on those pillars that used to support the regime for years. One of them is international community indifference from many governments that prefer to look the other way around, while in Venezuela there were huge violations of human rights. The second pillar is certainly members of other public powers, such as members of the Supreme Court and Attorney General and so on, that are starting to, let's say, criticize and even state the need for a transition in Venezuela. And the third pillar, which is critical at this point, is certainly the armed forces, that has been seen as monolithic support to Chavista revolution because of the way it was infiltrated and controlled by both Chavez and Cuban military. But in the last months and days, we're seeing how many members of the armed forces have denied to follow orders to repress and fire to unarmed civilians. So I do believe these are signals that the Chavista revolution is tearing apart, and this is a moment in which we have to stay stronger, not only in the streets but in the international democratic community, letting Maduro know that he has certainly crossed a red line, and the world will not accept that he stripped out Venezuelan constitution and stays in place as not only as a dictatorship but as a criminal dictatorship in power.
Maria Corina Machado, thank you very much for joining us from Caracas in Venezuela. We'll be obviously closely following the events in Venezuela. Thank you for watching this edition of The Interview here on France 24. Muchas gracias.
Hello there, this is Live from Paris on France 24.
Get connected with France 24 social media. Take the first step. Tweet, like, become a fan of, break away from your TV. Find another dimension. Become even more linked up to the news with France24.com, together with our mobile and tablet apps. France 24. Get a connected view of the world.